Can this device compete with high-end models at a great price? Hi, thanks for joining a new video. This time we have a full review of the OnePlus 15. Let's begin. We are discussing the flagship model of this brand, which, even though it is a flagship, is offered at a slightly lower price than what we typically observe for other flagship models in Mexico. The launch price for the base version, which includes 12 GB of RAM and 256 GB of storage, is listed at 23,999 pesos, approximately $315. However, they immediately offer a launch promotion, which is actually its true price, of 17,999 pesos, which is about $986. Let's base it on that price because the other one, the reality of things is that it never existed. The device was never at that price. So let's consider this price because it's the one that makes it the most attractive alternative. In a competitive choice, the 512 GB option shows a crossed out listed price of 26,999 pesos, which is equivalent to $1,480, but the actual price is 19,998 pesos. Therefore, when considering both actual prices, the reality is that it can become a notably appealing alternative for those who are seeking a high-end device but do not really wish to spend as much as a fully flagship device might cost. Even though it is true that there will be certain cuts where it becomes evident that it isn't a full-fledged flagship, it still manages to compete quite effectively against other formidable competitors such as the Xiaomi T15 Pro, the Realme GT8 and others. Pro, even with the Galaxy S25, though it is a more compact device. It also faces competition from the Honor 400 Pro, the iPhone 17, and even the Oppo Find X9. The truth is, in this high-end market segment, there are more and more competitors vying for your attention. This particular device is only available through Amazon and Mercado Libre in Mexico, so in that regard, I think it's important to consider. It does have a minor disadvantage since it's not as easily available in physical stores. However, this situation varies in different countries. Join me to know it point by point so that you can give me your opinion. Let's start talking about the design. Here at the front we will find ultra-thin bezels. In this sense it is going to be very prominent. There are 150 millimeters of the thinnest in the industry, very similar to its cousin Oppo Find X. Here, the protection is provided by Gorilla Glass Victus 2. This is an enhancement over the previous generation, which featured a ceramic guard developed by OnePlus. It appears that they might have discontinued that project, or perhaps I'm not sure, but now they have integrated Gorilla Glass Victus 2. This is quite good in terms of durability and resistance. However, I would have preferred if they had included something with anti-reflective properties as well. However, when discussing a flagship that's not entirely a flagship yet, it provides us with quite a good result. The frames feature a unique finish described by OnePlus as MAO ceramic coating, which stands for micro arc oxidation. It's a rather intricate process. It involves the use of ceramic coatings on light metals. A relatively high voltage is applied to enhance the hardness. According to OnePlus, this frame is 4 times stronger than aluminum and 3 times stronger than titanium, making it quite intriguing. This material is in the camera module too, making it fall resistant. On the right are volume and power buttons. The frame feels soft, very nice. At the top you'll find the microphone along with the secondary audio output. Meanwhile, on the left side there's a unique button from OnePlus which they refer to as the plus key. Essentially it's quite similar to what is known as the snap. The Oppo back cover only works with a long press. It can't be set for 1, 2 or 3 taps. To me, it seems it would be more beneficial if they permitted users to personalize it with various activations. At the bottom, we can see the tray designed to hold 2 nano SIM cards. Additionally, there are 2 other microphones situated next to the USB-C port. Finally, you will find the main speaker, which features 2 wide perforations. The back cover is crafted from glass, yet it has a finish that feels exceptionally soft to the touch. It's among the most premium devices I've seen lately. I love this design, both aesthetically pleasing and durable, offering IP66. 68 and 69 are included, but there's also IP69K, which offers an even greater level of water resistance. In this regard, it performs excellently. We will notice it is 8.8, 1 millimeter thick, which is thinner than the previous generation, and it weighs 211 grams, just 1 gram more, so it meets expectations effectively. I have the sandstone version available, but it also comes in black and purple, so you can choose your favorite color. The screen is a solid 6.78 inches. Interestingly, it's smaller than the last generation and its resolution is also lower. We're now looking at a resolution some call 1.5K. 2772 times 1272 pixels. Others might still see it as full HD, depending on preference, but overall it has a pixel density of 450 pixels per inch. Plus, the previous generation featured Quad HD, achieving a pixel density of 510 pixels per inch. So, although we lose some sharpness, the reality is that it is almost unnoticeable at the typical distance we hold our smartphones. Therefore, we won't perceive a screen that appears to be of inferior quality. In terms of sharpness, in fact, the device will be able to adjust the resolution automatically. Most of the time, it will have the resolution set to full HD, and when you view images or any content like that, you will be able to go up. The standard one offers a balance of saturation and natural tones, plus manual color temperature adjustment. Additionally, it utilizes AMOLED technology, which means it can provide perfect contrast and vibrant colors when desired. In this instance, it is available with 3 distinct color renditions. The standard option, in my opinion, provides an excellent balance between saturation and natural tones. Moreover, it includes a manual adjustment feature for the screen's color temperature, as well as an adaptive tone option to automatically adjust the white balance. Brightness has significantly decreased. Regarding the previous generation, it's interesting because the general brightness has increased to 1800 nits, whereas it used to be 1500 nits. However, it no longer reaches the peak brightness that it once did, which was up to 4500 nits for HDR content. Therefore, overall, when not viewing HDR content, the screen appears brighter compared to the last generation, which is a positive aspect. Yet, for HDR content, it remains a screen that appears brighter than the last generation. You won't see a full show, but it still looks good. In this particular case, HDR is indeed compatible with various protocols, including HDR, plus HDR, Vivid, and Dolby Vision, so you can enjoy it wherever you want. YouTube, Instagram, Netflix, I tested it on all of them, and all the content looks pretty good. In fact, it's not only very good with respect to the highest brightness, also with respect to the lowest brightness. It's really very comfortable going down to just an 8 or even through the accessibility options. You have the option to reduce the white point, and you could go all the way down to 0. 5 nits are very comfy for evening. Actually, when you combine it with the dark mode and the eye care mode, it allows you to enjoy a really pleasant viewing experience during the evenings. What's fascinating is that, similar to the style of TVs, it includes features like image sharpness enhancers and color optimization. These are designed to make videos appear as if they were created with HDR. By default, these options are switched off since they would use up more battery. However, if you prefer, you can activate them to enjoy their benefits. And finally, in this particular case, the display is designed with the capability to vary its refresh rate from 0 all the way up to 100. By default, it operates at 120 Hz. However, within the settings, you have the option to choose if you would like to push it all the way up to 165 Hz in specific scenarios. As you'll notice, this display truly delivers in every aspect, presenting itself as a high-end device. It looks absolutely fantastic. Now let's delve into the topic of sound. In this instance, we have a stereo setup featuring 2 high-quality speakers. Here, they truly haven't compromised at all. The experience of using an all-flash device is genuinely noticeable. Not only does the main speaker deliver a strong presence of bass frequencies, but the secondary speaker also excels. Thanks to its output through the frame, you can perceive a remarkably broad and high-quality sound. Let's take a moment to listen to a brief test, but do keep in mind that hearing it live is not quite the same experience.
Ven y baila junto a mí. Voces en el aire, pura vibración. Cada frecuencia, mi corazón. En esta prueba somos tú y yo. Perdidos en el sonido, en el
Regarding the software, it includes all the features we are familiar with from this family. However, it lacks an equalizer for the speakers, although it does come with surround sound capabilities, among other features. Moving forward, I will frequently refer to the Oppo Find X9 Pro, which is closely related. While some argue they are nearly identical, there are indeed distinct differences. However, in terms of software, they are very much alike, meaning all the sound functionalities are exactly the same as in that model. Therefore, I encourage you to check out the Oppo Find X Pro video review in this section if you are interested in learning all the details, because it includes the same high-resolution codec support and the same clear voice feature for calls. However, what we will be focusing on is the microphone hardware. During the concert test, we will evaluate how they perform. As you could hear, the microphones, they do adjust the gain correctly, they avoid distortions. In fact, we even notice the change in frequencies when we are closer to the treble and closer to the bass. The truth is, it picks up the audio very well, even in these kind of super noisy scenarios. And to close this block, of course, as expected, it has vibration motor on the x-axis, also with a motor of excellent quality, and the software takes advantage of it very well. In these types of interactions, you will notice a particularly pleasant bounce in the hand, providing a truly premium feedback. This is evident even when you swipe on the indicators and other elements, and naturally on the keyboard itself. The experience feels ultra premium in every sense. Like the front-facing camera boasts an impressive 32 megapixels, featuring a lens with an aperture of f2.4. And equipped with autofocus capabilities. What's particularly interesting is that the sensor is of the RGBW type, meaning it includes white pixels alongside the standard red, green, and blue ones. This allows for more light to be captured, enhancing the quality of images. In theory, this sensor is the IMX709, developed in collaboration with Sony. Notably, this represents a significant evolution from the previous generation, which only had a fixed focus and utilized a simpler sensor. And we'll see the results shortly. In this case, we have several quick release methods. We can press, for example, one of the volume buttons with the screen off, or even draw one if you prefer to set it up that way. But it also supports double tapping on the power button to enable this option. Of course, you'll need to set it up for it to work. There you have it. Once you acquire it, check to see if it opens quickly, whether it's locked, unlocked, or in any kind of environment. Let's take a closer look at how it responds. Honestly, in that regard, it performs quite well. Moreover, at the software level, it includes the same features that we observe in its cousin, the Oppo Find X9 Pro, along with the same rapid capture methods that simplify life. So if you want to know in detail the software, go see the video of its cousin, because if you did not know, OnePlus and Oppo are exactly the same. The same group and brand. They were separate before, but generations ago they united, so they look very similar. The selfies have good detail, which I like. The color is not very accurate, but it offers different angles to crop photos for another perspective, and the combi, I believe the camera performs excellently in managing noise effectively. Additionally, with the autofocus feature, you can capture even the smallest details in your photos using the front camera. In that regard, it truly fulfills the expectations we have for a high-end device, delivering outstanding performance. Keep in mind that in backlit situations, the preview is still not very well optimized. Although it tries hard, the result after taking the picture is quite pleasing to me. It maintains a good contrast and a nice level of detail in these types of backlit scenarios. In the evenings, it is noticeable that we will also achieve a satisfactory outcome. I believe the camera does a commendable job at controlling noise effectively, yet keeping a good level of detail, even though the screen, by default, attempts to light up your face with an artificial flash. Personally, I don't like how this is reflected in the lens. However, you can easily disable it, and it still maintains excellent photo quality, especially regarding the details on your face, while also effectively managing the noise in the darker areas. I wouldn't say it's the best camera in the range, although it doesn't expose the most illuminated areas as well, but in general, the photos are of good quality. It's not the top camera in the range. It truly delivers an exceptional performance during nighttime, particularly in terms of managing noise effectively. In this instance, it employs a RGBW sensor, meaning it includes an extra pixel, which I believe significantly aids in capturing light well at night. You can observe the difference, although using the screen to illuminate the face might not yield a very pleasing result. Nonetheless, it's good. I believe it's a camera that can compete fairly well, although it's not the most attractive option in its segment, as I mentioned earlier. The portrait mode in the evenings looks nice to me. It provides a pleasant bokeh effect, effective noise control, and good foreground detection. During the day, it maintains focus on objects. As a front-facing camera, I believe it meets high-end standards without being extraordinary. On the back, we find 16mm ultra-wide camera with f2.0, aperture and autofocus, with a 50 megapixel sensor. Then we find the main camera of 24mm with f1.8, aperture, autofocus, and optical stabilization with another 50 megapixel sensor. And finally, the 85mm camera with f2.8 aperture, autofocus, and optical stabilization, also with a 50 megapixel sensor. It's worth noting the last generation had a shorter telephoto lens but better aperture. Now we get more zoom but with a smaller aperture allowing less light. I understand this change, as more zoom is offered, which is normal. What confuses me is why they have moved backwards with the three sensors. They have maintained the 50 megapixels the same as the previous generation, and that might lead us to understand. There were no alterations. The truth of the matter is that when you examine the individual specifics of each sensor, indeed, there are challenges across the board. For instance, the ultra-wide camera used to feature the ISOCELL JN sensor, which measured 1/276 inches in size. It is considered a relatively small sensor. However, the sensor they have now integrated is the OmniVision OVD, which measures 1/288 inches. This means it is even smaller and consequently captures a bit less light. The same applies to the main sensor, which was previously the Sony's Litia 800. It had a size of 1/143 inches, but now it's 1/156 inches. This sensor is still a high-end Sony model, the IMX906, though it is smaller and comes with a more closed aperture of f1.8 compared to the previous f1.6. Therefore, these adjustments. We're told the manufacturer has somewhat neglected the camera and photography section. Remember, it's no longer in collaboration with Hasselblad, which might explain the lower standards. It's quite strange. And finally, the telephoto camera used to have a Sony Lithium 600 sensor, which had a size of 1/1.95 inches. Honestly, it was a pretty competitive sensor, especially when discussing a telephoto camera. However, now it has significantly decreased in quality by switching to a much smaller sensor, the ISOCELL JN, with a size of 1/2.76 inches. So, as you can observe, in every aspect they have taken steps backwards with the cameras, which is quite unusual. Fortunately, the software and processing developed by Oppo and OnePlus truly produce very nice results. However, it still doesn't appear to be a noticeable evolution over the previous generation. These high-resolution sensors allow us to make cuts in nearly all lenses to achieve. The maximum focal length with optical quality is 170mm, and it goes through other settings like 28, 35, or 48mm. However, this is in good light conditions only, because you will soon see that if the light is not sufficient, the sensors start to suffer significantly. It must be said that the device arrives with an interesting setting that is about high-resolution photos, and is that in automatic mode will be able to give us photos of 26 megapixels when it is a well-lit environment, and that gives us a level of detail higher than that gives us most devices that take pictures of 12 megapixels in automatic mode, although at night if it will lower its resolution. But the truth, I like this setting. Now please note that it is also going to behave in a very agile manner. In that sense, it does not disappoint at all. Additionally, we have a good burst. In fact, for the burst, just like its cousin, we found this option enables us to take a more defined burst or prioritize speed. However, in our test, while attempting to capture the number tray, we observe that it responds rather quickly, and it even appears to anticipate slightly. However, the burst takes a bit longer than normal to initiate. In this scenario, we are discussing the sharp burst option, which prioritizes detail level, resulting in exceptionally good pictures. And at the software level, we will actually discover the same options as its cousin, the Oppo Find X9 Pro. Therefore, I encourage you to go and check out that review if you wish to learn in detail about everything it can offer us. However, what it does not bring. It lacks the JPEG Max or RAW Max mode found in the device partnered with Hasselblad, and of course doesn't include the Hasselblad high resolution mode. It also doesn't have the camera button. However, it can scan QR codes without issue and features a text scanner in this special mode, which automatically detects edges for trimming and adjustment. But it still lacks the Hasselblad high resolution mode. It does not permit us to add any pages. Instead, it only allows us to crop or enhance the color. Interestingly, it also includes here another document scanner which functions well. I'm not quite sure why they offer two modes, but this indicates in a way a lack of optimization in the software. Nonetheless, in this alternative document scanner mode, we have access to a more advanced feature as it enables us to add multiple pages to our document. It automatically detects them, and there you have it. Once we have completed the process, we can enhance the resolution of the image and apply various optimization effects. Afterward, we can proceed to export in both image and PDF formats. It does take some time to optimize, but once that's complete, we will have the option to export. Under good lighting conditions, it's important to note that the ultra-wide camera provides us with high-quality images. We might notice some slight chromatic aberration at the edges, but it's nothing too serious or exaggerated. In that regard, I believe it meets expectations. The main camera, on the other hand, seems to offer improvements, especially in terms of the lens quality aspects. The camera is not very good in terms of distortion or chromatic aberration that it can generate in the edges, although it is not completely free of it, and I didn't like that so much considering that we are talking about the main camera. However, it's important to note that the device captures images of 24 or 25 megapixels in automatic mode if you've selected the option prioritizing high resolution. This will be achieved when you're in well-lit environments using the main camera. Even with the crops, like in this case, for instance, 28mm, we still notice a good level of detail. Additionally, it offers a 35mm crop, as we observed earlier. And also here it gives you a fairly detailed picture in terms of the resolution of the image. Then we have here the photograph in 48mm, that is to say 2x of digital zoom, but that looks like optical. The truth is that the level of detail is quite good, especially if you don't zoom in too much to get a closer look at the image. Then we jump to the 85mm telephoto camera, which I was telling you already has a more closed aperture, so you can see the detail quite well, especially if you don't zoom in too much to get a closer look. The 85mm provides more distance but less light, which in these conditions during the day is almost like daytime. There's no obvious aperture loss, but we'll check another test soon. For the moment, allow me to demonstrate that it also provides a 170mm crop. In this situation, when a face appears in the image, you'll observe that crops from varying distances will appear less detailed. I would suggest that even at 10x, which in this scenario is 243mm, it will still produce good quality photography in any kind of situation. Beyond this point, be aware that when faces are present, you will notice a result that resembles a watercolor effect. It doesn't appear as optimized in this scenario because the artificial intelligence isn't able to assist much here, given that it lacks recognition of the faces. Therefore, at the maximum zoom level permitted, which is 120x, it's quite an overkill, honestly. I don't think you're really going to capture a good picture there. In this case, you can look at another gallery of photos where it's evident that the range from around 16mm to approximately 240mm performs pretty well in terms of detail. However, the color might vary somewhat from one camera to another, so it doesn't maintain a high level of consistency. But in reality, there's not a huge difference compared to when OnePlus collaborated with Hasselblad as a partner either. The reality is that it appears the technology remained while only the brand disappeared. Take a look at how well detailed the photos are at various distances. Honestly, it looks impressive. In this instance, as I mentioned, even the 10x digital zoom continues to look outstanding. Also observe that the device allows us to capture panoramic photos using different lenses. These panoramic photos indeed have high resolution, enabling you to have quite wide and expansive pictures too. I love using the ultra-wide camera in panorama mode, and you can even use the telephoto camera for more artistic shots. Let's move to another zoom test to see how, without a face, the device's AI can better understand what you're photographing. To attempt to optimize this, observe that in this particular instance we move to 35mm, which is the point at which we are still discussing digital zoom using the main camera. However, we then transition to 85mm, which is the point where we utilize the telephoto camera. Honestly, the resulting picture appears quite beautiful. At this stage, it still doesn't depend on AI. I would say that up to 245.3mm, the AI doesn't have much to do. So within that range, the picture quality is really quite good. Following that, take note, for instance, in this scenario with 30x digital zoom, the detail appears quite artificial or fabricated. I emphasize that it allows you to zoom in much closer, yet here you heavily rely on artificial intelligence. In this particular instance, it refines all those lines, but lacks a genuine texture, making the detail we achieve appear rather fake. Observe what happens if we turn off the artificial intelligence. It looks a picture also forced, but less artificial. However, when there are letters, texts, or symbols that have shapes which are easily recognizable by the artificial intelligence, we will indeed be able to notice a rather intense level of optimization. I won't be able to take photos of these scenarios. However, I emphasize that it largely depends on how well AI can interpret these photographs and scenarios. At extremely far distances and in backlit situations, it's important to note that, yes, it will provide a balanced preview. This is a highlight because only a few cell phones are capable of achieving that. Furthermore, the resulting photos after capturing them are also of excellent quality. An ultra-wide camera exhibits less chromatic aberration, particularly when it comes to the purple and pink hues. You may notice a slight cloudy effect along the edges where the lit area meets the shadow area, but it's not as pronounced as it is on some other devices. The main camera shows improvement in this regard and continues to maintain a solid balance between lights and shadows, resulting in high-quality photography. However, to be honest, I don't think it quite reaches the level of a true high-end device. if it is perceived as a slightly simpler sensor, especially in the finer details, but the truth is that with either camera, the backlight behavior has been positive. Now look at the nights the ultra-wide camera exposes correctly the most illuminated areas, maintains a good detail, controlling well the noise in the darkest areas. I think it does a good job, as does the main camera. Under these types of conditions, even when the camera is set to a high resolution, the images will be at 12 megapixels. However, this still provides a sufficient level of detail. The truth is that it looks really good, and in this particular case, when you attempt to do some zoom cropping, the focus might struggle a bit more than needed. It doesn't maintain as high a level of detail as we would see during the day. Here, the short-range digital zoom is noticeably digital, but when switching to the telephoto camera, you can clearly see that we regain an excellent level of detail thanks to this technology. Even though it loses some dynamic range here, you can notice that the darker areas are already much more challenging, which is understandable in any case. We have yet to encounter a device equipped with a telephoto camera that offers a very high dynamic range during nighttime, but here you can observe some examples. Achieving up to 10x zoom at night is, in my opinion, still quite acceptable. Even when there is an absence of a light source within the frame, the camera manages to perform acceptably, though it occasionally tends to overexpose the image. Notice that in this case it doesn't use the telephoto camera at night in dark conditions. This is another example of the device overexposing the image, as it was much darker in reality. I used manual exposure compensation here to adjust the picture, making it look more realistic. I like that the device does bring that button easily reachable interface to achieve more realistic results, because I insist now you are seeing with the main camera the result. And it looks with too much lighting, which you might like too. But if you are more attached to more realistic photos, you are going to need to lower the compensation to make it look much more similar to real life, which is like this result you are seeing. I must emphasize that fortunately the device enables us to manage the compensation, allowing us to achieve more precise results. This is particularly noticeable in scenarios like these, where the wind was blowing, causing these small flowers to sway. You can observe that when the device is set to automatic mode, it struggles to provide us with a result that is as pleasing. However, by reducing the exposure, you will notice that the outcome becomes significantly more realistic and of superior quality. However, it does require some user intervention. For macro photography, keep in mind that this would be the result with the ultra-wide camera, as it has autofocus capabilities, making it the one used for macro photography. The main camera isn't able to focus from such a close distance, but it still provides a fairly detailed image. It's important to note that if we apply a bit of digital zoom, we can also observe a good level of detail. A telephoto camera is capable of helping us focus from this distance. Although it isn't entirely macro photography, I believe it provides us with good quality. Therefore, using any of the three lenses, you can capture nice macro pictures. Even if you crop the image on the telephoto camera, you'll notice that the photograph still looks quite good. It has a much more uniform focus than what you could achieve with the other cameras. Observe how with the ultra-wide camera the focus is much less consistent, and there are certain areas that are not focused very well. Because of this, I believe I would choose to capture macro photography using the telephoto camera, utilizing its 85mm setting, or perhaps even the 170mm setting. Just for reference, that object was of this size. For moving pictures, it is better to use the action mode, because without the action mode, it does not give priority to a very fast shutter, and that can generate results a little swept with some deformations that will be highlighted, especially if you are using a lot of zoom. And notice that with action mode on, it shutters faster, reducing blur, less sweeping, and even slightly less distortion than before, though it doesn't fully solve them. But if there is a significant improvement, be sure to look closely with zoom. In this situation, if we turn off the action mode, the resulting scene will appear much shakier, so it proves to be effective. As for portrait photography, this device performs well, allowing you to capture images from various focal lengths and observe how it will have excellent details, an appealing bokeh effect for the background, along with an accurate foreground detection that results in a highly natural and pleasing portrait photograph. Take a look at the photographs taken with the 85mm lens. I truly enjoyed it, as it captures excellent texture and colors that are quite accurate. Additionally, you have the option to choose from various color settings to experiment with the colorization of your images. Honestly, it performs exceptionally well because it not only adjusts the color but also enhances the contact and various parameters to capture portrait photos in diverse styles. I strongly believe that using the 85mm lens, the portrait photos turn out exceptionally well, especially considering the bokeh effect that it creates in the background. Moreover, even when applying black and white effects, the photos still appear in a fascinating and artistic manner. Portrait photography lets you easily adjust the zoom from 24 to 85 millimeters, letting you pick the exact zoom you prefer. I must say, I really like the photos taken at 85 millimeter, mainly because of the impressive bokeh effect it creates in the background. Here's the outcome without portrait mode, just using the 85 millimeter lens as is. With portrait mode, it truly excels and makes a significant difference. When it comes to video recording capabilities, we will find 8K available at up to 30 frames per second with the main camera. Additionally, 4K recording is available at up to 120 frames per second, both with the main and telephoto cameras. This is, let's say, a significant improvement over the previous generation, which did not offer such options. Moreover, you can also record in 4K at 60 frames per second with any other cameras you choose, providing us with a truly flagship level experience in terms of the compatibility. Of the available resolutions and frame rates for video recording, it again repeats the formula with functions that suppress up or find. X9 or Pro, that's where you can find that content for detailed information. What's important here is that it already lets us rotate to the front camera while still recording video, which wasn't possible in past generations. In professional video mode, like its counterpart, it supports log recording and uploading. I actually have some LUTs available just in case you were wondering or had any doubts. However, I must emphasize that if you're interested in exploring in detail all the software features it offers, I strongly encourage you to go and watch the video of its cousin. That video will provide a comprehensive look at everything. Here's an example shot in 8K. It is still scaled to fit 4K resolution, but the utility of this is to scale it up to 100%. For example, you can crop the clip and frame it exactly the way you want. This isn't something you'll be using all the time, but it does demonstrate the impressive capabilities of this cell phone. Now, you are also seeing a demonstration of 4K at 60 frames per second, which allows you to observe the high level of fluidity that this type of recording is capable of achieving. Compatible with the ultra-wide camera, this feature allows you to switch seamlessly to the main camera. And of course, you can also switch to the telephoto lens. In that sense, the experience is akin to using a flagship device, as it doesn't limit the quality across the different lenses. However, unlike photography, in this case, when using intermediate zoom settings, you won't be able to maintain the same optical image quality. Here, the digital zoom becomes a bit more noticeable, but the overall appearance still looks good and satisfactory. Now you're viewing the example in 4K at 30 frames per second, which is how we'll record the rest. Here we see chromatic aberration in the ultra-wide camera again. It's not very pleasing, especially at light and shadow borders, but in well-lit settings we won't notice it. The main camera improves in this aspect, with a bit more contrast, and the colors look remarkably good. The telephoto camera, when it records, does so with really good quality. In this particular case, there is absolutely no chromatic aberration whatsoever. It maintains good contrast and vibrant colors. However, it is starting to become noticeable that the dynamic range might not be the best. But let's take a closer look at the other clips. Here we are looking at the specifically backlit recording, where we can confirm that the ultra-wide camera produces significantly more chromatic aberration than we would prefer. There is actually even a bit of noise or grain noticeable in the darker areas, which for a flagship device already falls quite short of expectations. It might be perceived as a video from a premium mid-range device, but not entirely that of a flagship. This is where it seems they have trimmed some of the budget by modifying the main camera improvements. However, you can still notice a bit of chromatic aberration in the more complex areas. However, the way it balances highlights and shadows is remarkably impressive. It manages not to overexpose or burn out any of the brighter areas, which is a testament to its performance. In that respect, it really performs quite well. Additionally, the telephoto camera, as you will notice, also does a sufficiently good job of balancing highlights and shadows. This holds true even if there are faces present or if they go out of the frame. In this particular case, the device also incorporates an HDR recording mode, which you can view on monitors that are compatible with this feature. So, you're examining a conversion, and from my perspective on a compatible monitor, I can say that it looks quite impressive. It particularly enhances the darker areas compared to traditional video without HDR, although it doesn't create a dramatically different experience. The device already performs well without HDR mode, especially during nighttime. However, it's important to note that the ultra-wide camera once again demonstrates that it resembles more of a mid-range device rather than a high-end one. There are numerous complexities involved here that create many artifacts while attempting to reduce the noise that could emerge in the darker regions. This particular camera is advisable only for capturing scenes that are well lit. The main camera shows some improvement, but it is not a significant enhancement. Other high-end devices will certainly provide superior performance. In this context, it is seen as an area needing improvement. The main camera does manage to control noise somewhat better in darker areas, but I must emphasize that it still isn't anything particularly spectacular. On the other hand, the telephoto camera also tends to struggle a bit when it comes to reducing noise, yet I feel it actually performs better, especially in those dark areas where there's no light source available. It indeed does a commendable job, but what's noteworthy here is that it confidently uses the telephoto camera even during nighttime. And the aperture, well, it doesn't help all that much, but hey, the result is still quite acceptable. However, it does leave a bit of a bittersweet taste. Now take a look at the stabilization. In this case, without the special mode enabled, I think it works well enough with the ultra-wide camera, especially when you're just walking. When you start to run, you might notice that it still struggles to compensate for the more abrupt movements. The same will occur with the main camera. When walking, I believe it compensates fairly well, but when running, due to the more close lens, I think the movements become more apparent. The telephoto camera, for example, while walking also appears to achieve good stabilization. Interestingly, turning on the ultra steady mode doesn't seem to offer an advantage. In fact, I even notice more pronounced movements when it's activated, which seems a bit odd to me. This mode might not satisfy those who demand top stabilization. For zoom, if moved smoothly, changes between cameras are noticeable as it recovers. The camera has a high level of detail. In fact, like its Oppo cousin, the level of detail seems to recover when you release your finger. So while it's sliding, it still doesn't have a good level of detail. You have to release your finger to recover it. But the truth is that it comes good. It comes up to 18x with good stabilization. When focusing with the ultra-wide camera, you will notice that it responds quite well. It doesn't appear to take an excessive amount of time or hesitate too much, at least under these lighting conditions. Clearly, this camera is beneficial for macro shots because the main camera, due to its proximity, cannot adjust its focus from such a close range. In fact, it seems a bit slower compared to the ultra-wide camera. However, it does appear to have good accuracy. The telephoto camera is unable to focus properly when the subject is at such a close distance. The focus may often struggle when it comes to having more travel, yet it is generally seen as offering good stability. Fortunately, the portrait mode functions in 4K, which is definitely a positive aspect. However, it's important to note that there are some inconsistencies. In my opinion, if you're not moving excessively, it tends to perform well overall. Even if you're slightly moving your hands or making small gestures, it still performs well. However, the issues arise when it loses track of your face. At times, this could result in the effect being entirely turned off, leading to an odd and unsettling sensation. Fortunately, it intensifies when we are closer to the camera, this blur effect, and is also reduced when we are far away, but I insist that at times it could suddenly turn off and then turn on again. In this sense, it doesn't have such a premium feeling, but it does manage to keep objects more or less in focus without so much precision, but I still think it does an outstanding job, especially for offering us the K recording with this mode. Curiously, it allows using the telephoto camera in portrait mode and the result appears like much nicer, especially because of the natural telephoto perspective that you can get. I quite like this mode, considering also that it does offer us the 4K resolution available here. And in this case, it doesn't seem to be as inconsistent as the recording with the main camera, because this blur effect was not disabled, although it still lacks the ability to focus on objects as accurately. But if your hand is near, if you are aiming to focus them more effectively, then that is going to be a crucial tip to remember. When you want to maintain something in focus, you have the option to grab it or put your hand on it, and that sort of takes care of it. Now, if you want a reference, this would be the recording quality with the telephoto camera, trying to see how much depth of field it can get to generate, and note that it doesn't have as intense blur as we've seen in other cell phones, so I don't think you can use it as a sort of portrait mode. But, as I said, fortunately the portrait mode does accept using the telephoto. For slow motion, if you reach 4K at 120 FPS, you get detailed scenes. Using this slow motion mode. It's a feature that not many cell phones offer at the moment, making it a standout feature, especially since we're not dealing with a device that's extremely expensive. Additionally, you have the option to shoot at 240 frames per second in full HD if you're looking to slow things down, although with less detail, but it is also an option. Or you could even go up to 480 frames per second, but in HD and at a bit rate that does not go as high. So in too fast movements could be seen a sense of loss of sharpness. But it is also appreciated this possibility. In fact, slow motion supports HDR mode too. Interestingly, in this instance, you are observing a video that has been converted from slow motion, 4K at 120 FPS with HDR for the fast camera. You will notice that 15x is the most basic speed, and that is why it is not so recommended for people movements. Plus, it has no stabilization, but fortunately it is in 4K and goes to a bit rate good enough to not lose definition. But I think its main focus will be capturing landscapes, because it can reach a very high speed, and definitely in these scenarios, if you can reach to truly enjoy a high quality, more attractive. The front camera video has good detail with 4K support, stable while walking, and allows zoom to show closer details like your face using autofocus. However, it struggles in backlit situations. Here, you can clearly see that it's not a flagship in every aspect. As I mentioned, having autofocus is beneficial as it allows us to showcase an object. Though you can't be extremely close, it does focus closely enough to be enjoyable at night. You will notice that if you are in a well-lit area, the results are positive. However, once again, I don't believe it quite reaches the level of a true flagship device. Here we notice other small clipping. Fortunately, try to control the noise well. In the darker areas, you are going to have bigger problems, so you will see a brushstroke effect, which is not so nice. So if you require very good lighting for the front camera, here you can also enjoy the fast camera mode with the behavior that we already saw for the rear camera, although curiously it does not have front slow motion, but it does have portrait mode here at the front. And the truth is that this does very well because it is in 4K. The blur effect appears very nice, and since you're recording with the front camera, it's less common to encounter an object at the exact same distance as you. However, if you do come across such an object, keep in mind that you also have the option to. It mostly stays focused, though it may get confused, but the experience is positive like this recording. And of course, it also integrates dual recording mode with the rear and front camera at the same time, although it doesn't seem to have stabilization, and that should be better. In addition, it is not in 4K, and you can see that it goes to a bit low bit rate, then you do not see a video of maximum quality. In picture mode, you can move the frame, but it has a limit on the right. Fortunately, it does keep autofocus enabled and also the ability to zoom in, so it does have some great highlights. But the picture quality doesn't really come up to the highest quality. But it's unsatisfactory for a high-end device. You also have the option to use the round picture-in-picture mode, which follows the same behavior I previously mentioned. Alternatively, you can switch to a split-screen mode that divides the screen exactly in half. However, it's important to note that you need to stop your current recording and start it again before you can make this change. The same goes for rotating the position of the cameras. You must stop recording and restart it to do so. This requirement means you lose a bit of versatility in these situations. And you could also place the front camera as the protagonist in picture mode, but stopping the recording. First, we're going to talk about Android 16 software with Oxygen OS 16.1, which is basically the same as ColorOS 16. So as I've been telling you in various parts of this video, I invite you to go watch the Oppo Find X9 Pro video if you want to see in detail the description of all the software. In this case, we must specify that it comes with 4 years of actuality, software, and 6 years of security updates. So while it's not industry leading, from my perspective, it provides a sufficiently long-lasting experience. As I mentioned, the operating system will closely resemble ColorOS with minor differences like the clock's red number. The icons might vary slightly, but overall it's just a small difference, purely aesthetic. Speaking of aesthetics, if you keep the flow themes we've seen in other devices of this family, just with templates set a bit differently, but all can be customized the same way. It additionally features the always on display, which includes all the modes you can think of, ensuring it truly remains on at all times. Naturally, it also includes the shelf and the gesture for scrolling icons, conveniently accessible on the main screen. Furthermore, it has the sidebar with its usual options, including the floating app launcher files. Not to mention, it also has the rather unattractive one-handed use mode as well. We're using gestures in the air to answer phone calls, however, not for scrolling through apps such as TikTok and similar ones. I would have liked to see it here, but for details, you know which video to check out. With regard to artificial intelligence functions, the same thing happens as I have already mentioned in the software block. Being a cousin of the Oppo Find X9 Pro, it will have inherited the same software except for the application, which is not accessible on the cell phone, nor the document application, which appears to be exclusively for Oppo, that lets you translate and summarize PDF, doc in PowerPoint files, and curiously it's not available here. However, what it does include is Mindspace, which uses the button that is on this side, although if you configure it to open the camera or for something else, it would disable the option. But as you know, it allows you to somehow organize screenshots to have a little clearer information, or allows you to quickly record voice notes with pending that you may have. And then you can ask questions to this artificial intelligence to give you answers about what you've saved. It's interesting as it can detect event dates on the screen and save them to your calendar. And well, it also offers us the tools like the writer, translation, and transcription with AI. plus all the AI options in the photo editor that are quite advanced. If you want to see them in detail, go watch the video of the Oppo Find X9 Pro. I just need to tell you that when it comes to Google functions, luckily Circle to Search is integrated. This feature allows us, for example, to press and hold on the navigation bar to translate the text displayed on our screen. It also lets us highlight something we want to search for specifically. So we certainly have some great options in that regard. And naturally, we can access Gemini by pressing and holding the power button to engage in a chat with its assistant. You also have the option to share your live screen or camera. Although this feature is available on all Android devices, I am mentioning it to highlight its presence. Enhanced security we discovered in ultrasonic fingerprint reader. It reacts extremely quickly and doesn't emit any annoying light. It can even recognize your fingerprint if it's slightly wet. It supports up to 5 fingerprint records and allows you to change the unlock animation. All software functions are derived from the Oppo Find X9 Pro. For example, it includes features like facial recognition and smart notification hiding. It also offers payment protection, app locking and app hiding. There's a safe, an option to clone the system, and even the ability to clone apps. It includes a child mode, and there's even a collaboration with Avast within the security app to provide a comprehensive scan against malware threats. So you will be able to see everything in detail within that review. Now let's talk about the battery, which has a capacity of 7,300 mAh. It's a remarkably large battery, albeit split into 2 cells, and generally when this is the case, we see a bit of poor performance. In my test, this can vary greatly because battery life depends on your day-to-day life, but at least in my test, the truth is that it didn't fare too badly. Very well. We tried to drain the battery as quickly as possible by running a power draining application at its maximum capacity, and it only lasted for about 4 hours. This indicates that the processor uses a significant amount of energy and the battery cannot sustain high autonomy in such high consumption scenarios. When leaving the draining application running in the background while watching videos in the foreground, the time extended to 4 hours and 56 minutes. This shows an improvement, but it doesn't imply that the system is highly optimized for these kinds of background tasks. The optimization for background activities still seems limited. So it will be crucial that you close any applications you are not actively using to prevent high power consumption. During our test, when playing YouTube videos with the screen brightness set at 50%, after 17 hours it still had 19% battery left. Then, after 20 hours, it had only 2% remaining. In fact, at that point, it automatically switched to emergency or auto-saving mode and eventually shut down completely after 20 hours and 40 minutes. This isn't really something very surprising to mention. In this test, it was slightly above average. The average is 5,000 mAh batteries, and there's no difference here. Abysmal. In my test, it appears that the battery doesn't really stand out significantly. Keep in mind that you have access to the traditional saving mode as well as the super saving mode. So I believe with these features, you won't need to worry too much about the battery. However, I don't think it will be anything too remarkable in this instance. It supports a 120 watts charge, which is quite positive, but unfortunately, the charger is sold separately, which is a downside. In my test, something curious happened because if you look at the graph, it seems to run into 60 watts at the initial peak of charge, which gives me to understand that it is actually sending 60 watts to both cells of the battery. So I don't really know how this works, but it seems that it can get to take advantage of. The charger's maximum power expressed as it weighs 120 watts, but physically it's 60 watts times 2. I don't know, but it's curious. In 15 minutes, it reached 39%, which is good. And in 30 minutes, it reached 67%. And the full charge completed in 50 minutes, which shows it really charges quickly. It's interesting to observe the specific current, but it's evident that fast charging can be enjoyed. And regarding wireless charging, it can also be fast 50 watts, giving a full flagship experience. It also includes reverse wireless charging to put to charge some accessory on the back of the cell phone, and to take care of the battery durability. It also incorporates intelligent charging and charging lock with customized percentage between 80 and 100%. Connectivity is like the Oppo Find X9 Pro, so you can check it out. Let's take a look at that review here. It is important to note that the manufacturer has incorporated a chip that they developed in-house, which they refer to as the G2. Interestingly, the Oppo Find X9 Pro also features a chip developed internally, but it goes by a different name. However, for the sake of this discussion, let's consider it to be the same chip. This is because with the integration of that chip, the manufacturer promises to provide us with smarter connectivity options and access to the new Wi-Fi 7 technology. AI could prioritize tasks and boost antenna power to maintain a great reception. Plus, it has Bluetooth 6 and NFC, USB Gen 1 is included in this connector, allowing you to project your screen either by cable in mirror mode or also wirelessly. As all the advanced options we know from its cousin, it also offers the ability to share photos or videos directly with an iPhone by installing the app or connecting on the iPhone. It includes a beacon link for Bluetooth calls and features Android Auto. In terms of sensors, it includes an accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor and orientation. There is a gyroscope and a physical proximity sensor, along with an infrared sensor interestingly located at the back with the camera module. This setup allows you to control your air conditioner, your TV or other devices. I absolutely love this feature and appreciate that they continue to include it here. Regarding the ecosystem, OnePlus provides us with certain features, but as I mentioned, being part of the same family as Oppo and even Realme, we will be able to share several products. It's important to highlight that everything is quite centered around the multi-screen connect technology. As you can see, this will allow us to effortlessly connect to a tablet or a compatible computer. However, in the case of computers, you can directly install. This application allows you to perform quite advanced operations on any Windows computer. For instance, you can remotely control your computer from a website or a cell phone. You can also share clipboards and notifications and even operate your mobile device directly from your computer. However, keep in mind that this requires manual configuration. It's important to mention that the O Connect app is available for Mac users as well. So if you are a fan of the OnePlus cell phone but also use a Mac, you'll be pleased to know that this app helps to bridge the gap between these two platforms. This is an area where OnePlus and Oppo have been putting in a lot of effort recently to overcome the typical barriers that users often face. They have been working diligently to ensure better compatibility and integration between the devices and other operating systems. Somehow, the Apple ecosystem allows users to interact more seamlessly with these devices. It also includes Android's very own technologies that have been developed by Google, such as Quick Share and Google Fast Pair, which are designed for quick pairing of devices. However, when it comes to services, OnePlus is not a brand that appears to be very strong, so it relies somewhat on Google, as it does not provide its own cloud service or an application to manage home devices and similar functionalities. Let's evaluate the performance of the OnePlus 15. This device is equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 processor, and it also features 16 GB of LPDDR4X Ultra RAM and 512 GB of storage UFS 4.1, yes, without the possibility of putting a micro SD. And we finished the test. As you can see, it took 5 seconds to open each application on average, noting a brutal performance with these 16 applications. And now once the applications are open, let's check how the system behaves, for example, making this task quite stressful for the processor. Pay attention, everything moves incredibly fast. The reality is that it is extremely responsive without a doubt. This is one of its top options. The performance is high, utilizing its 16 GB of RAM. It never restarts apps, allowing fast switching. This is impressive. Now see how on Instagram we are also going to experience an exceptionally smooth fluidity with only the usual pauses when loading more content. However, the reality is that it performs very well and doesn't freeze at any point. For instance, browsing TikTok here. Now, we'll browse X and the device performs smoothly in every case without issues. Even with complex real-time graphic effects, this device handles them remarkably well. It also includes virtual RAM with an additional 12 GB enabled by default. I really don't think it's necessary, but if you need it, it's there. Normally it doesn't work, but well, in the storage I have the 512 GB version, so I have plenty of space. In fact, this version will be more recommended because in such a powerful device, which has such good cameras and more, I think you can easily fill it up if you record a lot of videos or take a lot of photos, high quality photos. That's precisely why this version is more recommended. It's not that it comes at an exaggerated price like some other flagship models. Additionally, it offers the option to easily clean storage with a debugger for WhatsApp, Instagram and Facebook. It provides suggestions for deleting burst photos and offers analysis to identify the largest files. In this regard, it performs quite well. However, keep in mind that there is a difference between storage capacity and its speed. In this case, the manufacturer claims it's UF4.1, so it should be ultra fast. Let's test it. We're running the test so you can see the results. Notice the read speed is 3,994.7 megabytes per second. The write speed is 3,791.7 megabytes per second. Interestingly, the RAM doesn't seem as fast in writing, but we have 1,535.1 megabytes per second for reading and 931.1 megabytes per second for writing. Let's move on to actual tests. Our project is ready here. The video we're exporting, notice how well the workflow reacts. We are going to export. It will be a 4K project. As expected in a device of this range, I remind you we're using clips recorded with this device, which together total 1 minute. That's about 19 seconds. I believe it performed well. Though not the fastest or most powerful in this test, it's okay. But when discussing games and all the software that comes with this device, I highly suggest once more that you check out the video on the Oppo Find X9 Pro. This device includes precisely the same gaming assistant, which allows us to review the content that we have installed. We will have exactly the same game manager and the same sidebar, although it says OP Gaming Core. Simply the aesthetics are different, but the operation is exactly the same. The same as I showed in that video with 2 extra options here. Initial feature is color enhancement. It doesn't allow us to select various presets or anything similar, but theoretically it will subtly alter the game's colors. The second feature is the ability to stream the game to a wireless display. This display can be your computer, provided you install the necessary software, or you can connect or project directly to a TV or another device. Let's say the only difference is adding this button, because the OPO, Find X9 Pro, can project your screen, but the button doesn't appear. These are subtle differences. For detailed options, watch the video review. Let's take a closer look at how it performed in the Call of Duty tests. By default, we have the graphics quality set to very high, which is at the maximum rate, just as you would expect from a high-end device. Additionally, we can also increase it to the maximum graphics quality, and it's important to note that in this aspect, it would offer excellent support for almost all additional effects. However, if you are aiming for the ultra rate, the graphics quality will drop to a medium level, and there will no longer be as many graphics options available. As in the other mode, however, there are still numerous effects available, so as is typical, we prioritize achieving the highest graphic quality possible, and in this regard, it resulted in an average of 60 frames per second. The overall experience has been exceptionally good, just as I anticipated. This processor is incredibly powerful, which means it handles graphics with ease without any issues. Additionally, in this situation, it managed both its temperature and the display quite effectively, remaining responsive throughout. Quite well. The manufacturer has a special chip for screen response, reaching 3200 Hz in touch sampling, which is noticeable, prioritizing refresh rate, and reaching an average of 120 frames per second. That's fantastic. The experience has been really quite good, and once again, it maintains excellent stability. You don't notice any unpleasant jitter or anything similar. Interestingly, even though it was already slightly warmer than it ideally should be, the material somehow makes it feel less warm in your hand. Additionally, the device will never experience a drop in performance, even though it's already a bit warmer than usual. We played Genshin Impact. By default, it's high quality, but for testing, we maxed it out. Very high, 60 FPS. The performance was great, averaging 60 FPS with excellent stability. The temperature at 43 degrees Celsius, I consider it is still between acceptable. In this case, the manufacturer claims to have incorporated a screen cooler with aerobic aerospace-grade gel to somehow encapsulate the chip and prevent heat from transferring to the screen. As I mentioned, it seems they've succeeded since the device sometimes doesn't feel hot. Imagine you increase the temperature during our measurement. Then we play Car X Street and he notices we're raising the graphic quality to the max, unlocking the frames per second limit. Notice how the processor has already reached a high temperature, possibly because the chip's encapsulation makes it hard to dissipate heat easily. And that is the sole explanation I can think of for why we averaged 26 frames per second. The situation was quite poor, especially when you take into account the cost and the processor, which has experienced significant fluctuations. Additionally, the temperature stood at 41.3 degrees Celsius. I must emphasize that it appears the method they used to encapsulate the chip in their attempt to cool it during these extreme maximum performance tests began to show signs of struggling. Although it took several minutes to start noticing a drop in performance, it seems that, at least in this particular test, it eventually became noticeable. Then we played Zenless Sun Zero, and it's important to note that we are also going to select the highest possible graphics quality at 60 frames per second. It showed improvement over the last game, already reaching an average of 58 frames per second. However, it still experienced some low peaks. It seems that it had already managed to cool down a bit more. At least that's the feeling I get, because it returned to having a good performance and once again with a remarkably controlled temperature. Next we played Guttering Waves, one of the heaviest. We also uploaded it to the highest possible graphics quality at 60 frames per second. To see if it was really able to give us that experience, and it definitely gave us a high-end feeling, because it did achieve 59 frames per second. On average, in this particular case, it is interesting to note that it did not drop significantly at its lowest point. Although when recording the screen, it was observed that it struggled more than expected. Then, at certain specific moments, you might notice that the screen recording loses some fluidity. It doesn't completely freeze, but the most discerning and demanding gamers might indeed notice these kinds of subtle details. This design also includes a vapor chamber measuring 5,731 square millimeters, which is quite large. Yet it still reached a temperature of 44 degrees Celsius. Case, and here we truly felt it in our hands. Lastly, we played Bright Memory, one of the heaviest games we have. We increased the configuration to 120 frames per second to check if it could reach that level. The outcome wasn't as high as expected. It averaged 60 frames per second. This is still quite good as it demonstrated very good stability. Although the Galaxy S25 Ultra that already has more time on the market, if you manage to reach 120 frames per second, for some reason we have not seen many devices achieve that. But well, overall the experience will be pretty good. Good fluidity, the temperature again a little high, but did not come to completely ruin the experience. Overall, it is a device that does have a high performance. In this case, it also has a back cover with a layer of white graphite above the processor and near the cameras to try to expel the heat. In fact, that is the area that gets hotter. We could say that it is not a specialist in gaming and cooling as Red Magic 11 Pro or something like that, but it will still give you a good gaming experience. In conclusion, this could be a trimmed flagship. It costs much less than other flagships, but it's also clear it's not on their level in every way. However, it excels in design, with strong resistance and great aesthetics. The work they've done on the framework, which OnePlus claims is harder than titanium and more resistant, is impressive. Then aluminum, it grabs my attention. Additionally, it provides a really gentle touch, and in terms of how it feels in the hand, it's one of the best devices I've experienced recently. The screen is excellent and the sound is impressive, but the front camera is lacking. Curiously, the rear cameras aren't bad, but it seems odd that all three have regressed from the previous generation, with less aperture in certain situations and a smaller sensor across all three scenarios. It's quite unusual, even though the results are still noteworthy. Remain positive, yet if we consider it, in this context, the OnePlus 13 might actually be a more favorable option. Video recording is also excellent, supporting 4K at 120 frames per second, and honestly it performs quite well. However, the battery is a concern that, at least in my tests, has not been so impressive. In the extreme drain test it fell short, and in the YouTube video playback test it wasn't particularly remarkable. But I must emphasize this is based on my tests, since battery life really depends on your daily usage. The charging power, if it becomes something positive in terms of to the times, because it will charge in less than an hour. Connectivity is also at the level of flagship, as expected, if it brings wireless charging, reverse wireless charging. And the performance also shows that it is a complete flagship. It is very fast, very good performance, so we will not say that it is a completely spectacular device for the price it has. But it is very competitive at this price level. For now, we have arrived at the conclusion of this video. I genuinely hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, you know you can show your appreciation and